ourselves look better in front of other people so we don't get judged.
I'll definitely, put a mask on and just pretend like everything's okay. So
sometimes it's easier to just put on a mask around other people.
Too bad that Christians do that, because we're supposed to be able to be vulnerable to each other and to accept our kind of fallen states.
And I don't think that it's a bad thing if we don't have it all together. I think it's important to recognize that this world is far too complex for us to try and make sense of it.
Do you feel like as Christians we think we have to have it all together?
I believe Christians think they have to have it all together just because in the Bible it speaks a lot of us being much like Jesus. And Jesus was pretty much a perfect person. He was the only person who existed in the world who was perfect. And when we see ourselves in the light of Jesus, we think that we can't be sinful and be accepted by God, who Jesus was. So I think it plays a lot of high expectations for ourselves as Christians, and sometimes they can be set very unrealistic.
Yes, I think that's kind of like the stigma that Christians get, that they have to live on this pedestal.
I think sometimes there can be some judgment around your vulnerability. I think especially speaking as a male, I think it can be even more difficult to be very vulnerable, because then that can be your sexuality can be questioned at being vulnerable and being open. So the topic of sensitivity becomes an issue when it comes to gender, because it's so one-sided, and you can't be. I feel like sometimes even in the Christian world, you can't be sensitive because there's so many gender roles that are pushed by the church.
I don't. I think that is the beauty of what the cross is, and I think that as Christians, we especially are supposed to know that we can cast all of our flaws on Christ, and that He wipes them all away for us.
There's a small group of people that I'll be very vulnerable to, and then there are, as your relationships move sort of outward, I will pretend more and more that things are just fine.
I think it's tough sometimes to be vulnerable around others. I know for me, I'm kind of introverted, so it's tough for me to open up. And
because you're a Christian, your life is supposed to be all together, which is not what's found in the Bible, but for some reason we have that stereotype.
Because that's the perception we have to be perfect because we're called to be perfect. But I think realizing you're a Christian is realizing you're not perfect and you have struggles, and I think we need to address and show those struggles just so we can be held accountable.
I think the sad stereotype, and actually probably there's a lot of truth to this, but sad reality is that being a Christian is synonymous with being judgmental. And people no one wants to be judged, and people are not as open to being vulnerable when there's that risk of being judged, I think. So
in order to be a good Christian, you have to be perfect. So
Do you see this as something that is happening at Bethel?
To a certain point, people think their stuff doesn't stink. I don't know how to explain that without swearing.
And so, because we have this really rigid view of theology, we want to project to one another that we're in the right camp, whatever that right camp might be.
I think that, I think it's a problem, people kind of want to hide their junk, which is unfortunate, because it's okay to have crap.
I don't believe that myself. But I definitely feel that around campus, that we should be a light to other people, and that people think that means that we should have it all put together. But realistically, I think people want somebody to relate to, and somebody that's been through something, and then through that process has grown a lot through it. That's something you see a lot. Mostly when somebody's participating in activities that are kind of against the norm or against what maybe the covenant says, then a big front is put on. I saw that myself for a few years, but now that I don't participate in those activities, I don't feel like I have to put on that front anymore.
in the Protestant churches, there are certain sins that you can confess to and other sins that you can't. Usually it's sins of the flesh that you cannot confess.
I personally don't think that we're that bad at just being fake. For sure it's something that we could improve on.
A definite facade on this campus and choice to become like oblivious, and some choose to side with ignorance because it's the most comfortable thing to do.
I guess like if no one really talks about like bad things that they do, or like if people don't do like things that are ethical, it's kind of looked down on. Yeah.
Do you think there is a solution, if any? What is it?
It starts with the individual themselves. They have to be willing to challenge themselves and engage in critical dialogue. Because otherwise, I mean, we're just repeating the same mistakes if we don't choose to challenge systems, challenge the status quo.
Getting to the point where people can take off the mask, you need to first be willing to talk with them on a one-on-one level of like, wow, that sucks, and not just give them the Jesus is your best friend talk, because that doesn't do anything.
More emphasis upon a personal relationship and a not so public relationship. I think it's really big emphasis upon being maybe it's not said all the time, but just being loud about your faith. And yes, you are supposed to be loud and have people see you that you're strong in your faith, but it shouldn't be for your own good. It should be for what? For God's glory, for Him being shown to be good and you less.
I think too many people feel they have to hide a lot of stuff and pretend that it doesn't exist, pretend that they are different than who they are, and that can get to a point where it's damaging psychologically and spiritually to that person, even physically to that person. Ways to promote greater acceptance.
I think it's all on an individual level. I think that once you decide like you're gonna be real, then I don't think you can like have a mass change.
You know, we have a lot of masks and we're hiding from one another, and it's only in smaller groups where trust has been built that some really honest things are said to one another. In classrooms or in co-curricular activities, when we gather, there has to be more just real honest conversation about the fact that building community and building trust is really difficult and hard work, and being transparent with one another is going to be challenging.
I also think that it's important to be vulnerable around other people, especially like close friends, and to open up around them. It's really good.
I believe that in order to grow as a Christian, you have to be vulnerable around your peers, especially if they are Christians, because you can't grow unless you allow yourself to drop those walls and tell people what's really going on in your life, so they can give you that wise counsel in the Spirit and allow you to grow as a human being and as a child of God. I've studied things like how to change as a Christian. We talk a lot about charity versus justice. And the way that's played out is you can see a solution to a problem, or you can just give in the hopes that things will change. But if you continue to give and not attack the source of the problem, then things won't necessarily change for the better.
I don't know. I don't know if it's possible to wipe it all away, because I think that it'll probably always be there. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Transparency with close friends is key. If you have somebody you can really be honest with, you can kind of understand yourself through talking to them, and then through understanding that, through those discussions, you can kind of understand how you want to interact with other people, maybe non-Christians or Christians with different views.
Like, if we just become comfortable with this idea that it's okay to be goofball, like it's okay to be messed up, it's okay to have crap, and like that vulnerability and honesty and truth-telling is like literally the only way to heal.
I think a solution would just be that we learn to accept each other as we are and realize that we don't have to have it all together, and it's okay to have days where we're grumpy and days where we make mistakes. This is a great environment to make mistakes because we're surrounded by people who, are Christ followers, so this should be the best place for